Remember, remember the 5th of November, bonfire, costume, and smoke. There once was a reason that during the season, Americans burned the Pope. Between the 17th and 18th centuries, Americans in New England celebrated their own version of Guy Fawkes Day, which they called Pope Day, or sometimes Pope Night. Rather than build and burn an effigy of Guy Fawkes, Americans built and burned effigies of the Pope and sometimes the devil. This anti-Catholic holiday served to reinforce the idea of Protestant freedom from papal tyranny, and culturally tied the colonists to the English motherland. The first recorded instance of a Pope Day celebration in America dates back to November 5, 1623, less than 20 years after Guy Fawkes attempted to blow up the English king and Parliament. Sailors staying in Plymouth, Massachusetts, lit a bonfire that got out of control and burned down 5 houses. This was an apt start to what would become a largely working-class celebration that developed into a very rowdy and at times violent holiday. Over the next 150 years, towns across New England developed their own rituals and customs for celebrating Pope Day. In some towns, boys and young men dressed themselves as little popes and went door to door asking for money, food, or drink. In other towns, the boys and young men would make small effigies of the Pope, drag them around on boards or shingles, and also ask for money, food, or drink. In Boston, the working class went from simply parading an effigy of the Pope through the streets to constructing floats pulled by horses that included not only the Pope, but effigies of the devil, monks, priests, and friars. At times, the parade would stop at the home of a middle or upper-class person and demand a contribution. Oftentimes, the contribution was demanded in the form of a poem, and a purser would step forth to collect the money. A refusal to contribute could be met with broken windows or other property damage and possibly theft. Writing in 1821, one old Bostonian recalled a common Pope Day sight. Quote, "On the float in the middle was an effigy of the Pope in an armchair, dressed in gorgeous attire, with a large white bush wig, over which was an enormous gold-laced hat. Before His Holiness was a table, on which there was a large book, and playing cards scattered over it. In the rear of the float was a gigantic figure to represent the devil, a hideous form with a pitchfork in his hand." End quote. At night, the effigies were carried to a hill above the city and burned in bonfires. Over time, 2 competing groups jockeyed for public attention in Boston and attempted to make not only the best Pope effigy, but also battled the rival group in an attempt to capture the other Pope, to burn along with theirs. One Bostonian, Isaiah Thomas, recalled, quote, "A competition, it seems, early arose between each part of town, which made the best popes and devils. Hostility soon commenced. In those battles, stones, brickbats, besides clubs, were freely used, and although persons were seldom killed, yet broken heads were not infrequent." End quote. The rivalry between the 2 papal gangs grew ever more violent, and November 5th often resulted in property damage along the parade route in Boston. It wasn't long before colonial authorities sought to stem the violence and mitigate damages, but were met with mixed success. Beginning in the 1760s during economic hardship, Pope Day revelers added non-religious effigies to their parades, such as civil servants and customs officers, whom they deemed oppressive. To at least one witness to a Pope Day parade, the parade during this time was as much against the local wealthy as it was against the Pope.
Well, sir, aren't you going to do something?
What, for instance?
Those ships out there are loaded with His Majesty's Marines. Bring them ashore!
I take my orders from the governor.
The American Revolution largely put an end to Pope Day celebrations, after George Washington demanded such a celebration be ended so as not to offend their French Catholic allies. One of the last large Pope Day parades happened in Boston in 1774, when it was occupied by the British Army. The parade route passed by the home of General Thomas Gage, to whom a party of papal officers was dispatched for a contribution. General Gage met the party on his door and presented them with a monetary donation, and the parade moved on. Though American independence from Great Britain brought an end to traditional Pope Day pageantry, some New England towns adapted the day to recent American history. On November 5, 1785, some boys and young men from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, constructed a 2-faced effigy of the infamous Benedict Arnold, and either burned or hanged him. Elsewhere in New England, Pope Night was still popular among boys and young men who built bonfires and tormented the townspeople by knocking on doors before running away, along with blowing horns and whistles. In some cases, the old tradition of dressing up and going door to door remained popular. As late as 1897, young men from around Newburyport and Marblehead, Massachusetts, stole tar and flammable items to burn on big bonfires above the towns. By 1913, Pope Day had largely disappeared in New England. The Boston Evening Transcript interviewed a senior citizen. She remembered that on November 5th as a child, she dressed her brother up to go mumming. something we might call trick-or-treating today. Though no longer celebrated in America, Pope Day once helped bind American working-class people to their faith and to England. Do you know of any modern American traditions related to Pope Day? If so, leave a comment. I'd like to hear about them.